Thank you very much, Abhijit Banerjee, to be here with us. Thank you as well, Ricardo Aguado, our lecturer in economics, that he's going to make and lead the conversation with him. As you know, we will have some questions for him at the beginning, and later on we will open the floor to anybody that wants to ask any questions added to the conversation. Of course, respectful questions and interesting questions, and that the invitator will decide if he replies or not. We have to leave at 5 to 6, so till 5 to 6 we will have to close because he has an event at the Guggenheim. So thank you very much again, whenever you like.
Okay, good afternoon, Professor Banerjee. Good afternoon to all of you. Thank you very much for being here with us at the University of Deusto Business School. It's a real honor for all of us to have you here in Deusto Business School. So, well, we are going to proceed with some questions for Professor Banerjee. I will start with 3 or 4 questions, and then the floor will be open for all of you also to share your doubts or your questions for Professor Banerjee. So the first question is about the reasons you had to choose development economics as your field of research. Why did you decide to study how to fight poverty, or which could be the best options to help people living with scarce resources? Was it a call, a duty, or something else?
You know, if you are you study economics and you grew up in, I grew up in the city of Kolkata, which is in the east of India. My parents were middle class, but we lived kind of for accidental historical reasons in a neighborhood with a very large slum, which had happened after my grandfather had built the house. And we were literally the last house before the slum started. So we lived with, you know, at least contiguity with a lot of poverty. And, you know, you could see, therefore, I played with a lot of kids who had a very different background from mine, and I saw a lot of things which were very different from the lives we had. So it was not, I don't think it is, and one of the things that comes out of that is a sense that, you know, many of these children seemed, in terms of, I don't know, whatever you call talent, no different from us, and yet we knew that they would have very different lives. It was destined, it was completely clear that they would not have the kind of lives we would have. They didn't go to school, or if they go to school, they did go to school, there were schools, but the schools were not of good quality, and they were clearly not very motivated to go to school or to be focused on it, and all the factors that make, and I don't think it's any different actually in even in a very you know, prosperous place like this part of Spain. But I think in the end you see that there is a lot of wasted opportunity, and there are lots of wasted talent, and you wonder why. And so I think that was always, especially if you're studying economics, and there is a quite kind of bland, sort of unreflective way of dealing with, you know, people are different, they have different outcomes. That's sort of how economics used to treat poverty, and it seemed somehow wrong, and you felt that it was. So I don't think I was not particularly I mean, I did not study development economics as a PhD student because I went to a class of development economics and I thought it was incredibly boring, whatever they were doing. So, and it was not really about poverty. It was about, how you have to have big models on the computer to do calculations. It seemed extraordinarily boring. So I never went back. And I studied economic theory, and I was professor of economic theory. And but at the side of your brain, you always keep asking the question: how do these things? How do they get married? How do they have a conversation? And eventually, I started doing some work. And then I started to see what I could maybe teach or do research on that would be different, and maybe a little bit address myself to this question of why are there so many poor people in some places and not others, and why do the poor live different lives than others?
Okay, thank you. So now we are going to move to the methodology you are using in your work. In which way do you think that the methodology you and your team are implementing in your projects is different from other methodologies in the field? Would you say that your methodology is more accurate, or your methodology is offering better results?
So let me back up a little. So what Ricardo means by what we do, we set up in 2003. We set up an organization called the Abdul Latif Jameel Poverty Action Lab. The Poverty Action Lab now works in roughly 100 countries. We have 1,000 professors who are part of our team in everywhere in the world, in universities in Europe, in the US, in Asia. And what we do is we try to evaluate anti-poverty policies defined very broadly. So policies that reduce sexual harassment are also anti-poverty policies in this very inclusive view of what anti-poverty policies constitute. We study them through large-scale field experiments. So what do I mean by large-scale field experiments? Experiments in the medical sciences are carried out in labs. They have the structure where you say, okay, we're going to randomly choose a control group and a treatment group, and the control group will get some placebo, and the treatment group will get the pills, and we'll see what happens. In these experiments, there's about, the typical experiment for which you're testing a cancer drug, there'll be 70 people, 90 people in the experiment, and those people will come in every day, get the pill, and go home, come back the next day. If you're doing experiments on sexual harassment, you don't know who's going to harass whom, on which day and what. Therefore, you don't have this ability to just put the pill in people's mouths. So field experiments in the social sciences have the same structure, which is you randomly choose, let's say, neighborhoods where you do a campaign against sexual harassment, to continue that example, and neighborhoods where you don't, but then you compare the outcomes in those neighborhoods. So you often cover 1 million people, or we've done experiments, we have covered 15 million people. So the experiments are a different scale. The measurement is obviously, as a result, very different. The way you think about designing the experiment is different. So it's an experiment in the same sense as a drug trial is an experiment, but it's also its own thing. Now, why do we do that? Because if you want to look at, neighborhoods where, let me change my example, schools where children do better and schools where children do worse, it would be silly to compare schools which had lots of computers and schools which didn't, and say that the difference is because they have computers. Because you have to think about why some schools have computers, others don't. And if it is because the parents of the children in some schools have more money, they can also get better software, they can also get tutors, they themselves have books at home, they have the time to talk to the children, then to ascribe all that difference to the fact that the schools have computers would be clearly silly. And you want to avoid that. So the reason to do experiments is to control for all the things that might be different. So we have done many experiments on putting computers in school or software on computers for many years, actually, since the late 90s. And in those experiments, you randomly choose schools or classrooms in schools where some of them, typically this is hard to do it at the sort of classroom level, so probably at the school level. Some schools will get computers, some schools will not get computers, some schools get a specific software and others, and you look at whether it makes a difference. And sometimes you're surprised, and I bring up this example because even though it seems obvious that computers should be helpful, there's lots of trials of a particular project actually associated with MIT, which is where I teach, called One Laptop Per Child. It was a big MIT kind of year 2000, very visible project. And almost all of them find that these have no effect on learning. So sometimes the obvious is not the obvious.
Okay, thank you. Now we are going to come back to Deusto Business School, to the University of Deusto. Our strategic plan motto at Deusto Business School is transforming the world together. We are certain that we must transform by taking care of the world. And to this end, the role played by business schools in training is essential. Any hints that we should not forget?
Since I don't know what to say, how would I know? I'll say, let me say what I hear in what you're saying, which I fully agree with, which is that I think that one of the more dangerous ideas that often come from economics, which is this idea that business is about making money and nothing else. Given the size and scope of business in the world, and the extent to which we are sort of passive, I would not say victims, but sometimes we are passive beneficiaries, sometimes victims of choices made by business. I mean, this idea seems to me to be patently absurd. I mean, the fact that Twitter was bought by Elon Musk, who happens to have loose change of $44 billion, since he has decided to pay himself $56 billion salary every year. He has that in his back pocket. And then he removes all controls over what people can say, because he prefers to say whatever irresponsible things he likes to say. Of course, for the rest of the world, there was a communication channel which was taken away from them. You don't want to use Twitter anymore because you are associated with so many voices that are sort of so toxic. And so in some sense, the fact that some people have business decisions of some people change the world for the rest of us all the time, for better and for worse. I'm not saying it's always bad, but is something that clearly, if the idea that business should be about making money seems so patently absurd, but it's associated with one of the most famous, regrettably most famous, I think, economists of the 20th century, Milton Friedman, who was very much an advocate of this view that businessmen should not think of anything else. And it seems to me that in this world, that's now we know that that's going to, either we will do something about it, or it's going to generate a crisis from which I think the world will have a hard time recovering. So I think we are really, there's no two ways about this question of, can you really say, just make money and the rest will take care of itself? I think that idea is so patently absurd that I don't think it deserves a discussion.
Okay, so we take note.
I'm sure you have already taken note. I just want, given me the opportunity, let me say it.
Okay. And the last question from my part. We are in front of about 20, 30 young, bright minds. Some of these students are just about to finish their degree in business administration, while others have still some years ahead of them before finishing. All of them have demonstrated competencies of leadership since they are representatives of their classmates. Would you like to share with them any message or any idea for their professional careers?
Well, I'll continue on the vein I was going, which may be a bit tedious at this point, but nonetheless, which is that I think the one thing that I think is, I would say I'm very lucky that I'm 63 years old and I totally love what I do. I've been doing it for 40 years or more, and I still totally love it. So don't think about what you will do for the next 3 years. Think of the next 45 years, okay? You're young, you have but it's really a very different perspective on life, because next 3 years, maybe this is I'm going to be traveling everywhere and this job is going to be exciting, but then will you actually like your life after you've done that? And you have to like it for the next 42 years after the next 3 years. So think about life as it's long, and for most of you, you will be very successful at what you do. So work will be a huge part of your life. Work will kind of frame your life. There will be other things. I hope there'll be other things. There'll be families, there'll be friends, there'll be other hobbies. But work is going to be dominant influence on your life. You'll either want to get up in the morning and go to work, I still do, or not. And I think you have to think, when you think of what you want to do, you have to think long term. I not only need to do this now, I need to want to do it for the next 40 years. And it changes your perspective on your choices.
Okay, thank you very much. We have still some minutes ahead of us. So now the floor is open for questions. Anyone would like to ask a question for Professor Banerjee? Well, we have Guillermo. Guillermo is a colleague.
So thank you very much for your inspiration. We here in the Basque Country, we have a problem of people. We are, demographics in advanced countries are lagging behind. We need people from developing countries. And here we have a problem. It's very important that we do it the right way. Not only bringing people that we need, but also building a better world. Do you have any suggestion on how we can do it? How we can, from a region, that Basque Country, that we need people from India, from Africa, from other parts of the world that probably are looking for a better place to work, but we just don't need to make a brain drain, but also to build a better world. How we can do it? How we, in your...
It's an interesting question. I think one that I think actually I would say there's no very strong evidence on. It's one that I wish people studied more, but it's very hard to study because, of course, there are countries which have policies of relatively, mostly relatively short-term work visas, and countries which have policies of 0-1 work visas. Either you get a work visa, you keep it as for life or not. And I haven't seen, because the countries that have 0-1 work visas tend to be sort of Western democracies, and the other countries which don't tend to be more authoritarian countries. The comparison is a bit, you can't compare the outcomes of those programs because they are not the same. These countries are very different. And clearly there is, the problem with the short-term work visas is that they create enclaves. They create, because people then come in with the idea that they don't need to engage with this with the host society. They just need to make money, save the money, and go back. And that has so in many social respects that has its own set of issues. On the other hand, from the point of view of the host, the home country, there is evidence that return migrants are, now that's the reason I'll say the evidence, I'll say why I don't necessarily believe the evidence, but it's interesting. The return migrants are often investors, entrepreneurs, in the home country. Now, of course, return migrants are not randomly chosen. They return for reasons, and they might have an aspiration to do something. So it's hard to know whether the return migrant question. In other words, this is your classic question which deserves an experimental answer, but I've never seen a country that's willing to do this experiment. But it deserves an experimental answer, because it is actually a question that has many dimensions, but it's also one where I think we could otherwise never know, and it is one that's consequential. It does seem to have. There seem to be clear bifurcation here. Abu Dhabi has short-term visas, and the US has permanent residentships. So you have this divide, and then you have to somehow basically. So you can choose what's your favorite narrative, you can choose it. That seems to me to be a bad place to be. We want to be in a place where there's some evidence that you can lean on, and we don't have it.
Okay, thank you. And there is questions there?
It's somewhat a related question. So Guillermo's question was just now somewhat about inclusion, and I know that as part of JPO, there was, just for the last years, a collaboration with the Ministry of Inclusion. So I was wondering if you could say something about how those RCTs were implemented, because I think that a lot of the work that you do is mostly in the Global South, but I think it would be really interesting to hear in your own words how the work that you and the JPOL team does has been implemented actually in our own country, and even in our own Basque region.
So, okay, it's not actually true that most of the work we do is in the Global South. One of the places where we do, I think, the most work is actually in the US. The US is one of the countries. US and France are two countries where we do a lot of work. So there are exceptions to that. The US in particular is an enormous presence in the work we do. So what is it? What's your name? Huh? Luth. What Luth said was, mentioned was, we've been for the last, I guess, I'm going to say 4 years, we worked with the Spanish government, the federal government really, as a start, to evaluate a specific fund that was an EU fund for, originally was a COVID fund, and the use of that by regions. This anti-poverty COVID fund, and how it was used by the regions. Did it have positive benefits? So there was an evaluation built into, and there were remarkably, I think 37 randomized controlled trials organized by regional governments, including the government of this region. And there were 33 of them were actually carried out extremely efficiently. And there was a conference, I would say, at the beginning of the summer in Madrid, where the results were presented. It was done extremely. The work we in JPAL is our organization, the Poverty Action Lab. We supported it. But the work was done by the whole group of, I think, 18 Spanish academics, plus another 12 or 14 people working for the Ministry of Social Inclusion. And the work seems to have been done very efficiently. What is striking also is that almost all of them find that these projects were successful, which is not what I would have expected. But, usually the fact that you do a good evaluation doesn't mean the project is successful. Sometimes it means the project was, like I said with the computers, the project failed. But in fact, most of these where you see improvements in social outcomes, you also see improvements in social outreach. The goal was partly just outreach, reaching people who were not being adequately reached by the social support system, and it seemed that these interventions actually did reach people, and did reach people who were not being reached otherwise. So that it was a very, I would say, for me it was a very optimistic experience.
Okay, more questions? We have one student there.
Hello. Last years, there have been so much technologies that have disrupted the market, and one of these is the artificial intelligence. And I would like to know if you think it will bring us closer to the eradication of the poverty, the artificial intelligence, or if it will be prejudicial to the working class, because there are so many people who says that will replace so many works.
So I think that what is clear is right now, if you are a carpenter, artificial intelligence is unlikely to take your job. If you're an accountant, it will take your job. So it's important because it's not the poorest people, at least in the US, but a lot of the people in the, the bottom, maybe the second tertile, the third, people who are in the middle of the distribution. In a country like India, these are people at the top of the distribution. They're the people who work in call centers. This is who are going to be affected massively. So it's not so much. Now, for the poorest people, and I'm not saying the carpenters are the poorest people or the electricians are the poorest people, but even if you're a farmer, it's not going to be, a farmer in India is unlikely to be negatively affected by AI right now, because in fact, the delivery of healthcare and education probably will improve with the use of AI. Where I think the people who are going to be hurt will be in India, the middle classes, in Africa, the middle classes, in Spain, maybe the lower middle classes. That's where I think the most likely, not the people who do delivery, package delivery, but the people who are going to be, do some accounting job or some a receptionist in a office. These kinds of jobs are going to be much more vulnerable. So it's a little bit, in that sense, it's a little bit. I think many jobs will be replaced. I'm not at all optimistic that we will soon find new jobs for these people. So in that sense, I am quite pessimistic, but I would say that it's not so much about the poorest people in the world. It's about a different group.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes, we have some questions there.
Well, thank you, Professor Banerjee, for coming to Deusto. I wanted to know what's your point of view on the recent global phenomena such as the COVID-19 or the global warming, and how it will affect poverty. Do you think it will increase, decrease? How does it affect?
So let's leave COVID-19 out, because I don't know what the next translation of that is. So let's leave that out. With global warming, I think it's very clear that a lot of poor people will die. I don't think there is any two ways about it. They're dying now. Basically, days. This has already been true for many years. That if you have a day in India or Pakistan or Niger where the average daily temperature is more than 35 degrees, that's a lot. 35 degrees in the middle of the day happens in Spain. I was in Granada, and it was 40 degrees. But the temperature falls quickly, so the average daily temperature is almost never over 35 degrees. If you have days where the temperature is actually above 35 degrees, you can compare different areas where the temperature has, the number of days in a given year. Say 2007, there were more 35 degree plus days in this part of India compared to, let's say, that part of the US. The US has, the south of the US often has these days as well. And you see that it's a combination, and you see that many more people die in that year compared to other years in India and not in the US. And in rural India, basically places where you work outside, you have no air conditioning, people die. So one of the things that's already happening, because the number of 35 degree plus days is going up very fast. And so people are dying. People are already dying, and many more will die. I don't want to sugarcoat that. That happens to be the sort of tragic truth is that we're already there.
Okay.
I think Ricardo, she's been raising her hand.
Here.
Okay.
Oh.
Okay, go ahead.
But on this side,
yes, no, we will change afterwards. Okay,
Okay,
go
so
ahead.
My question is more related to your job career. You said that you have to enjoy what you do every day. So I was wondering how your work life changed after winning the Nobel Prize.
I was very lucky. The world was not, but I was very lucky. COVID-19 happened right after. So therefore, unlike most people who win Nobel Prizes, I didn't go on a world tour. There was no world tour to happen. So my work habits never really changed. I'm very much someone who appreciates the fact that I still wake up in the morning and I do go to teach and I do research. I don't do anything else. So it didn't really change my work life.
So, thank you. Now we are going to have another question there, and then we will move things. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Banerjee, for this fascinating talk. I was wondering if we could go back a bit to the question that Ricardo asked about methodology. So you have pioneered the use of field experiments in economics, and so applied economists know of the advantages of experimental methods over observational research. And in most economics still do observational research, the vast majority of it. So, and we have seen over the years how exaggerated the effects that you usually find in data tend to be. So I was wondering how you assess the quality of the overall research that is done in field experiments, and how optimistic you are about any particular trends that you might find in that type of quality over the time.
So I think that observational research has vastly improved since I started studying economics, when it was really quite, it was exactly this comparing schools which have computers which schools don't. I don't think people do that. I think the greatest value, I would say, of experimental methods is that it alerts us to the fact that there are many things that we could take as sort of, it's easy to get lost in the data. And I think what experimental methods do is it gives us a clarity. This is the benchmark. If we want to think of something, can we think of it as being unrelated to other things? That's what we're trying to achieve. Not the randomization per se, but the fact that when I say this is the effect of computers in school, I'm not taking with it the effect of parents, take effect of the neighborhood, effect of the other children who go there, effect of the quality of the teachers. So I need to control for those things. And I think we have much better observational methods because we now are very conscious of how much these things matter, and that if you go from something that's purely observational and you are not mindful of these things, to something that's also observational but where there is a lot of care given to that, you get very different results. So I think that's maybe the most useful thing that's happened, is that, as you say, most of the work is observational and will always be, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's just the consciousness of what is it that can go wrong is much deeper now.
Mm-hmm. Okay, please.
You have done a great amount of research in the educational field, and you have proven that education is key to fight corporate poverty. And in that line, I would like to ask, what unexpected finding you have made in this educational field that you think should guide the educational policies, both in the future and in the present?
So I don't think I have done anything. I mean, you give me too much credit. I don't think education has anything. I have no. I totally believe that education is important for fighting poverty. I don't think I have done anything to show that. Most of my work has been about how to make the classroom education more effective. And I think probably the one, if I had to say one takeaway from that work, there are of course many and different pieces of work, it's the fact that it's easy for the whole education system to get obsessed by the curriculum. We call that the tyranny of the curriculum, that this is the curriculum, therefore it is what needs to be taught. Doesn't matter if the children understand it, if they like it, if they find it useful, if they find it engaging. Some body has determined that this is the curriculum, and you see that, I would say, I know among European countries, because of my wife, I know France well. And in France, you have the same problem. I've talked to the education ministers, and you have the same kind of slightly, okay, we have a great curriculum, we're going to teach it. It doesn't matter whether the curriculum is great or not. If your children are not engaged, if the curriculum is not reaching them, it's your fault, not their fault. And I think that, to me, is the first order. And when you fix that, children learn much better and much faster.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Still, we have some minutes ahead of us.
I would like to ask you like a more personal question. I think maybe when you were a teenager or you were in your 20s, you ever thought of the Nobel Prize, or you just thought, I want to be a good teacher, I want to love what I do, and then the things will come with it?
Yeah, I think it's silly to think of the Nobel Prize. It's not. You have to be very lucky. Something you did just happened to be more successful than other equally plausible things that you could have done, and then you get the Nobel Prize. It has nothing to do with, you can't have a life plan to get a Nobel Prize.
So thank you very much. You know that this is your home now.
Thank you.
University of Deusto will always be open for you, and Deusto Business School particularly, but also University of Deusto. Thanks. Congratulations for the prize you're going to receive this evening in the Guggenheim. And I want to thank as well to Jordi Alvareda, who is not here, who is the person that really has been able, that has facilitated that you have been with us this afternoon. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you so much.